Welcome, everyone, and thank you for being here with Amazing Kids, where we believe people with autism are truly amazing. Please mute your microphones, keep cameras off, and use the chat to share reflections or questions as we go. We will open the live Q&A near the end of today's conversation, and you are also welcome to email questions afterward at amazingkidsautism@gmail.com. Today's conversation is part of our expert series where we highlight leaders and organizations working to strengthen autism support in our communities. Let's begin. I'm Simone Olson, co-founder of Amazing Kids. Amazing Kids is a virtual autism diagnostic clinic serving families across Florida. We believe children deserve access to comprehensive, evidence-based autism evaluations in less than 72 hours. At Amazing Kids, we believe a diagnosis is not the endpoint, it is the beginning of a plan. Our mission is to empower parents with teamwork so children can grow toward independence and confidence. One of the most important parts of that teamwork is knowing which resources exist in the community and how to access them. Today, we are honored to spotlight two occupational therapy professionals who have spent their careers helping children and families build the skills needed for everyday life. Today on Amazing Kids podcast, we are honored to introduce two dedicated occupational therapy professionals who have spent their careers supporting children and families across Central Florida, Dr. Joseph Warner and Ms. Jennifer Boudreau. Dr. Warner brings more than 4 decades of experience to the field of occupational therapy. He has been an occupational therapist for 43 years, and for 33 of those years, he has served as the owner and chief occupational therapist at Child and Family Consultants, where he has worked closely with children and families throughout Brevard County and East Central Florida. Dr. Warner holds a doctorate in occupational therapy and is certified in sensory integration evaluation and treatment techniques. He also founded the Brevard Autism Coalition in 2009 to unite medical professionals, educators, and service providers in support of individuals with autism and their families. Ms. Boudreau brings 16 years of pediatric occupational therapy experience and a deep commitment to helping children build skills, confidence, and independence. She recently opened her own practice, Innovative Beginnings Therapies LLC, where she meets patients where they are, in their homes. Together, through their work, they support the mission of empowering and educating individuals and families across the lifespan by providing guidance, resources, and community awareness. Dr. Warner and Ms. Boudreau, thank you for being here today. Dr. Hensley, please get our conversation started.
Thank you, Simone. Good afternoon, everybody. It's so great to see you today. Thank you for joining our Autism Playbook seminar. This is an exciting seminar today as we're now transitioning from meeting amazing families to now meeting amazing teammates. So, as a healthcare provider that's been caring for children with autism for so many years, unfortunately, in healthcare, we're limited with time. And so I want to kind of just take a step back and talk about something a little bit more personal before we jump into our interview today. Why did we go into healthcare? Why did I go into healthcare? Most of us really didn't choose this field because we knew it was going to be easy. We surely didn't do it for the paperwork and the generation of productivity. We choose it because really something in our lives changed. There was a point in our life where internally we knew that it was our duty and our passion to take care of people. Maybe it was a child that nobody understood. Maybe it was a family member that needed somebody to listen, or just a moment that we realized that you had the knowledge and the compassion and the advocacy, and that could completely change the trajectory of somebody's life. So, healthcare really isn't about just managing conditions. It's really about reducing that suffering, increasing understanding, and creating possibility. And everything Simone just said is all about creating possibility. To hear this history, and I'm so excited to have two amazing guest speakers today, but all the years of knowledge and experience we have here on this panel today, and all because we want to help you and your child with autism. And we're caring for children with autism in a space where families really feel overwhelmed because of our health care system. They feel confused and sometimes just grieving the loss and not knowing what to expect for the future. Unfortunately, children are really misunderstood long before they're understood with autism. And so in these moments, we're not just diagnosing, we're really shaping narratives. We're helping families move from fear to clarity, from isolation to support, and from uncertainty to empowerment. So this is the reason we're doing the Autism Playbook seminar. And I want to start by reading one page in the Autism Playbook. The day your child is diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder is the day you are the expert on your child with autism. The day your child is diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder is the day you are the expert on your child with autism. And I know that's scary and intimidating as you walk out of that medical office with that diagnosis. But the most important thing to realize is yes, you are the expert on your child, but now it's time to build a team. And so that's why we have the Autism Playbook seminar. And I want to introduce you to teammates who I feel are absolutely invaluable in the life of a person with autism, whether you're a child, an adolescent, a young adult, or an adult. OT has a place to serve you. And it's about reconnecting to this purpose and equipping you for the tools to live out your life to the full capacity. Because once we identify the autism through the diagnostic process, now we have to figure out how do we get your child to function in daily life. And that's where your occupational therapist comes in. So, occupational therapy, in the truest sense of the word, is the everyday activities that give meaning to life. So, pretty simple, but very complex at the same time. So, with that, I would like to start our conversations with Dr. Warner and Miss Boudreau. So, good morning to both of you.
Good morning, and thank you for allowing me to participate this afternoon.
And
Yes,
thank you
thank
for
you as
joining.
well.
Wonderful. So, first thing I just want to start off, I know Simone gave us a great introduction, but if we can start with you, Dr. Warner, can you just share your journey and your path to becoming a healthcare provider and an occupational therapist?
Well, I'll make a long story short. I think I had good fortune when I was in high school to start looking at different professions and have an opportunity to do a lot of volunteering work. And so I spent some time at a law firm, realized that that was not going to be for me. My parents were eager for me to go into my father's profession, which was banking. So I spent a little time there and was really sure that that wasn't for me. And then I had an opportunity to volunteer at a Center for Cerebral Palsy on Staten Island, New York, where I grew up. It was called a Nina Eaton Center. And when I went there, I got a chance to meet occupational therapists, physical therapists, speech therapists who were working with the the children and young adults at the Nina Eaton Center. And I gradually began to feel like this sort of feels like home. And I was really interested in the communication aspects of the speech therapy. And having been, someone who did a lot of sports growing up, I was really interested in all of the looking at motor capacities and so forth. So I was, spent some time with the physical therapist. But what really caught my interest was occupational therapy because it gave me a sense that I could address and help people both with the physical aspects of health as well as the mental health aspects of health. And I really liked the idea of being with somebody using activities that were familiar to the child or the adult that I was working with and having a chance to try to understand them both from the physical aspect and the mental health part. And I think the other part that also caught my interest is that a lot of what occupational therapists do is you might consider us, just big problem solvers. And what I mean by that is because we have such a varied background, when we're working with a child that says has a toileting issue or a teenager with a low vision issue or a young child who's not quite yet crawling or walking, we can not only do understand where they're coming from, but we can problem solve and collaborate with the parents and any other professionals. What's the best technique? What's the best process? What's the best accommodations or adaptations? And so I really like that idea of being able to help somebody as a problem solver navigate through the issues or difficulties that are helping interfering with their desire to live the full life that they want to lead.
That's great. Can you just elaborate on how mental health and occupational therapy intersect in your practice? That's beautiful to hear.
Jennifer, how about you?
Oh, did you hear me, Dr. Warner?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
That's okay. That's all right. I was like, can you just elaborate a little bit on how occupational therapy intersects with behavioral health for you in your practice? Because I had never heard that before, and I'm excited to hear your thought process on that.
Yeah, and I'll start in a way with my training. When I was an occupational therapy student at Downstate Medical Center in Brooklyn, New York, for example, I did an internship in pediatrics. I did an internship in a physical disability center, but I also did an internship at an inpatient psychiatric unit at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital. And I had my education as a therapist had given me a lot of information and background in mental health issues, but having that varied experience of kids' physical disabilities and then actually being on an inpatient psychiatric unit. And on one of the internships, I was there every day for 3 months to understand the clients who they were serving. So it really gives you a sense of what's the full picture going on with somebody. And to paraphrase an old statement I think we've all heard, from one of our past surgeon generals, is that there's no health without mental health. And everything we do, whether it's taking care of ourselves, taking care of others, jobs, recreational activities, there's always this intermix and combination of both our mental health capacities as well as our physical capabilities. And one of the things that, again, occupational therapists do, which is a little bit unique and precise, is that we also have an ability to understand how the sensory systems work and how your ability to process and understand sensory information affects your behavior in a variety of different ways. And of course, when we're talking about kids or even adults who fall in the autistic spectrum range, virtually everyone, sometimes it's mild, but sometimes it's severe, have issues related to sensory processing and sensory sensitivity, overreactivity or underreactivity. And so, how those sensory systems work and how they, in a way, they kind of are the bridge that kind of connects a lot of the mental health issues as well as the somebody's physical capabilities.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Jennifer, how was your path to becoming a healthcare provider and occupational therapist? If you could share that with us.
Yes, of course. And actually, speaking of sensory concerns, that actually is where the start of my journey was. In elementary school, I used to be very overstimulated by loud noises, other kids in the classroom that would yell or the teacher would yell, and I would have an emotional response. I would start crying. And I didn't realize until I was older that I had that auditory hypersensitivity. And at that time in elementary school, they just sent me to a counselor once a week or once every other week. And they didn't have the knowledge then of sensory integration and what that was. And then also growing up, I always worked with kids. I was in lots of different 4-H clubs, and we did community events and went to nursing homes. And we worked with kids with special needs as well, and with my family. And we went to foster homes and worked with kids as well. So I had all this experience and I always enjoyed working with kids. And then when I started my career at University of Florida, I originally was thinking about physical therapy, and then I learned about occupational therapy. And I realized there's so much that can be worked on in occupational therapy. There's so many different areas we can focus on and so many different settings as well. And like you said, there's the mental health aspect, the physical, the motor capabilities, and activities of daily living that we can work on in home and in the schools and in clinics. And so there's just so much variety. And I'm also a very creative person. So I like to problem solve and be a detective and figure out what's going on here, assess the situation and try to figure out what strategies are going to work best for kids. And one strategy does not fit all at all. Every kid with autism is just, one kid with autism. Everyone is so different. And so taking an individualized and creative approach is right up my alley, and I love it. And I'm very passionate about helping others and seeing kids make strides and just reaching their goals is just, it's the best. So that's why I'm an OT.
I love all this passion. So, Jennifer, I'm going to go off our script just a little bit. Tell me, what are the top 5 reasons someone would come and see you for their child with autism?
I would say, speaking about the sensory, often there's so many sensory terms thrown out nowadays: sensory processing, sensory integration, modulation. So sometimes the parents will notice, that their child is having, what they might call meltdowns, when they go to the grocery store or when they're in the lunchroom at school, they, just break down or they don't want to communicate with others. So I would say sensory difficulties would be one, definitely a big reason. Another area would be activities of daily living. So this is things we're doing every day, toileting, showering, washing hands, hygiene, all of that. So sometimes kids on the spectrum have difficulty. There could be multiple different reasons they have difficulty in this area. It could be sensory difficulties, hyposensitivity. There could be motor planning difficulties. There could also be primitive reflexes that aren't integrated, or there may be some, underlying mental things too, like anxiety surrounding these type of activities. So that's another big area. And a lot of people think when they hear OT, they think handwriting and fine motor. And that is one very small part of what we do, but it's definitely is an area that we work on as well. Um, and then let's see, what else? Let's see, that was 3 of them. And just in the school system itself, if children are having difficulty, working in the classroom, working with others, and that social communication and play skills with others too, we can touch on. And then overall, I guess it was put under the umbrella of behaviors, in different settings, when parents are noticing their children are having difficulty and they don't know what it's coming from. OT is a great place to start to try to tease out what exactly is going on and what strategies can be used to help.
Excellent. And in your opinion, then I'm going to jump over to you, Dr. Warner. In your opinion, do you feel that the diagnosis of autism, because I know you're going to see patients oftentimes before they get their autism diagnosis, how does that shape your treatment plan? How does that diagnosis kind of unlock additional support and direction for you when you're developing that treatment plan for them?
Well, it does and it doesn't. When I first get a chance to meet parents or caregivers with a child, the first question I always ask them is, who is your child as a person? Who are they as a kid? And then I kind of follow that up by trying to ask the parents something to tell me about who they are too. And so I always want to start off with trying to understand who this little person is, what their likes, what their dislikes are, how they communicate, how they play, how they let somebody know if they are feeling a little stressed out, how do they regulate themselves if they're stressed out. And I want to find out all that information first. From there, we can look at, as Jennifer was saying, what's the functional difficulties that primarily, brought them into a clinic or for an occupational therapy evaluation. And then we can kind of, look at their temperament, their sensory processing, their motor skills, their developmental milestones, and so forth and so on. And then we kind of put together, well, what's this child really need, and how do we address their needs? And then, how do we address what the parents are looking for too? I think where the diagnosis comes into play is that for a lot of parents and caregivers, it really helps them kind of have a sense of they know what they're dealing with. It gives them something to say, okay, this is where we're at. This is what's going on with my child. And then, so now I can have a place to start, as you put it so elegantly before, the first step in this journey. What we've been finding the last few years in particular is that we're getting a lot of referrals for young adults in their 20s who now are outside of the school system. They are no longer receiving services, and there's a lot of questions as to, okay, what skills do they really have? Or, how are they going to get some type of a part-time job or even do volunteer work? Or how can they start learning how to use mass transit? Are they capable or not really capable maybe of learning how to drive a car? And then we've also been getting quite a few referrals with adults in their 30s. And those referrals usually have to do with issues related to jobs. the sensory aspects of the jobs, for example, coping with colleagues that might be wearing strong perfumes, or, some folks, because of their sensory issues, probably would be more productive and if they could work from home versus working in an office where there's might be hard to drown out all the excess noises and commotion that comes with an office, that type of thing. So we're definitely seeing adults who have been diagnosed with autism later in life, and they've been struggling at their jobs. And how can we help them sort of understand where these issues are coming from, but also develop like a toolkit that they can help themselves with, both in terms of adapting their work environment or adapting things at home, and on occasion trying to help educate employers, that somebody's sensitivities to sounds and noises and smells, so they're really real and genuine, and they can really have a negative impact on someone's ability to be able to work.
Thank you. Can you kind of help share with us like kind of the state of occupational therapy in Florida? How does a parent find the right occupational therapist? Are there long wait lists, specifically for child with their behaviors or feeding or toileting or whatever the concern is? How do they find the right therapist? And again, is it hard to get in with occupational therapy typically?
Ms. Jennifer, you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll lead it off and then I'll let you finish and add some more to it. So from what I've heard, there seems to be wait list at most clinics in the surrounding areas in Florida, and we're here in Brevard County. And there is different settings too. So there's clinic-based therapy. I myself do mobile therapy. So I'm going in the home working with children or going into their schools and working with them. But there does seem to be a wait list and not enough OTs.
Yeah, I think in this area, I always describe this Melbourne area anyway as sort of being a big small town. And so a lot of referrals, really go back to how well the pediatricians and the general practitioners and family doctors, and psychologists and teachers, how well they know the occupational therapist or the clinics that are in the area. And I think that's one of the ways that we get a lot of referrals at child and family consultants. Another thing is, just to be perfectly honest, it has to do with insurance. If you do have a child with a special need, they're likely to need therapies not just for a month or two, but 6 months, a year, 2 years. It's hard to know for sure, but a lot of clinics, individual practitioners, even hospital-based facilities, they don't always take all of the insurances. A lot of places really struggle dealing with Medicaid and so forth. And so oftentimes it doesn't leave families a lot of options besides, where is there a clinic or an individual professional that's able to work with their insurance or the type of Medicaid that they have. I wish it wasn't that way, but that does have a lot to do with sometimes who gets referred where. And as Jennifer was saying, there just aren't enough therapists available. So oftentimes, people are on waiting lists. Again, unfortunately, Brevard County is really has expanded its population. We're somewhere around, I don't know, 650,000 people strong, but there just aren't enough healthcare professionals, whether it's occupational therapy, physical therapists, psychologists, developmental pediatricians. So we really have a shortage of medical practitioners throughout the county, and that includes getting into therapy services too.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate. I'm glad that you brought that up. And as a parent with this new diagnosis, learning how to advocate can be very challenging. So you get the diagnosis and now you have to figure out, okay, I can get on wait lists, and do I just sit on the wait list or do I get out there and advocate? And so that's really what this seminar is about, is teaching families, hey, these are your teammates and these teammates are critical. I don't want your child being the child that sits on the sidelines while we're waiting for the teammates to get on the field. And so you have to be proactive as a parent and do your best, because people are out there and they are very educated and very happy to care for your child. And so sitting on those wait lists, waiting for people to call you, shouldn't be an option. And so getting on Facebook groups with where other parents are, there are resources out there. We just have to work really hard to find those resources. I want to shift a little bit. COVID really changed the landscape for us as a whole, families and healthcare providers. But as a healthcare provider, doing virtual autism assessments was something I never in a million years thought that I was going to be able to do. I was like, I got to get my hands on these kids. I got to see these kids. But as we all know, we had to do virtual healthcare to take care of our patients. Otherwise, kids weren't going to be getting the assessments. And I realized that this virtual healthcare is a gold mine. I can see kids in their safe home, in their natural environment, doing the things that they do every day with their family, with their siblings, with their toys, with their string that they play with, whatever it is. I can see children in their natural home environment. And it actually was a gold mine. So prior to that, I was having kids come into the office, they'd get their vital signs, they're agitated. By the time they get into the room, now they need another 15 to 20 minutes to settle down before I can really get a great assessment of them. I've lost sometimes 15, 20, 30 minutes of time just getting them assimilated to the hospital and to the outpatient room. And so with virtual healthcare, that's all gone. Kids are in their safe space, their natural home environment. So, both Dr. Warner and Ms. Boudreau, how did your practice change with COVID? Do you do anything different now that COVID is a thing of the past? Hopefully, it stays in the past with your patient care.
Yeah, it definitely was a learning curve for all of us doing teletherapy, going virtually, and changing the strategies and the way that we teach things. But it is really great having virtual and teletherapy, which I do as well, because your parent, they're the biggest team player, and we all want to work together and be able to teach the parents, this is what we're working on, this is why we're working on it, and teaching them the strategies that they can use at home, that they can use when they're out in public. So teletherapy, it definitely does cut down on that time, like you said, Dr. Hensley, of getting a kid to come in to the clinic, especially if they're resistant to doing that. And that regulation piece, if they're at home in their safe place, they're already regulated. So that takes out a little bit of that, which is nice to having more time to work with the parents and the kids virtually.
Thank you. Dr. Warner, how about you?
Well, we all had to learn how to do telehealth because it has a lot of benefits that Dr. Hensley mentioned and Jennifer you just mentioned too. So that's been a process for us to learn, and a lot of families have been able to take advantage of that as we've learned how to go about doing that in the most efficacious way. COVID also changed the landscape in a couple of other ways, though. One is that, for example, from a referral standpoint, we got a lot more referrals on kids with social skills issues and academic issues that probably were at least linked to the fact that they were outside of a typical mainstream school type of environment. Now, that probably could not have been helped, but that did change the landscape a little bit in terms of referrals. And the other thing that happened too, which was sort of indirect, is that we also wind up fielding a lot more questions related to vaccinations, and should my child get vaccinations for COVID or even flu shots, and those types of health issues, because what we were aware of before the pandemic, but even more aware of afterwards, is that a lot of other healthcare professionals didn't always have the time to sit with the parents or the caregivers to review some of this, and we don't want to be in position of necessarily advising people on whether to get shots or not, but we do want to let them know that we can provide them with the most up-to-date information as to what's good basic health care. And so we wound up just getting a lot more general healthcare questions than we might have in the past too.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for that. And so, parent gets their referral and they're coming to you. What happens next? What can a parent expect during the first phase of occupational therapy, the initial evaluations?
The initial evaluation, usually the parents will fill out some client intake information. And I like to start with a parent interview so we can find out what exactly is going on, what's their specific situation, finding out the child's developmental milestones, their birth history, if there was any, trauma at birth or anything with the pregnancy that happened, learning about any diagnoses, medications, all of that, to have all that background information first. And then depending on what the concerns are, that'll guide the type of assessments that are used. There's several different standardized assessments. There's other informal like sensory checklists that I use. But, testing primitive reflexes, that's something that a lot of people are not aware of that can impact so much of learning and behavior when those aren't integrated. And then, all the sensory areas, looking at those as well. So part of it is conversation with the parents. And then the other part is, having the child do some of these different tasks, these motor movements, also looking, at gross motor versus fine motor, and looking at higher level executive functioning skills, and also, their social skills and interactions with me and their family, and figuring out, that dynamic, and figuring out what's most important to the family. Because as a clinician, I might see something and be like, okay, we need to work on this area. But if that's not something that's important to the family, that's not meaningful to them, then we don't want to focus on that, because we're there to support the family and the children and find out how we can best support them in the way that's meaningful to them.
Excellent. That partnership is critical, right? And so
Mhm.
that parent feedback and input, and then of course patient as well. Dr. Warner, what are your thoughts on that question?
Yeah, no, I would say everything that Jennifer said so eloquently a moment ago. I think what we try to do too is lots of times the parents are coming in on the anxious side for one reason or another, or maybe even the stress side. So what we want to try to do is create an atmosphere that's kind of warm, friendly. Hey, I'm here to help and listen, and we try to establish that we're going to try to be as good a listener as we can when we first get a chance to meet the family and the child or the adolescent. Taking the kids back and showing them we got all these toys and things you can play with. It's not a doctor's office where you're going to get shots. So it's starting out that relationship by trying to make someone feel warm, comfortable, safe. And a lot of the times, the parent interview, although we're looking for information, and we start out talking about the child, by the time we come around to the end of the interview, what I hear from a lot of parents is that they're grateful to have somebody who seems like they're listening to them, and somebody that they can just, sometimes it's venting, just talk to. And they so often need to feel like they've got a health professional who's able to do that part of the role too.
How might a parent distinguish between an occupational therapist who might just be simply maintaining the routine versus someone who's really helping drive like functional progress for the child?
I think, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Good.
I was going to say that a lot of it just comes back to having that collaborative communication first. When the parents are sitting there in the therapy sessions, or they're sitting next to their child on a telehealth session, and you're also finding time to talk with the parents sometimes before or after the session, or sometimes at a separate time. I think that getting that collaborative piece going, I think a lot of times helps the families see that their child is making progress, and also progress is different for different kids and families. I mean, sometimes the progress is that a child is able to ride a bike, but sometimes the progress is that the parent feels comfortable enough that now they know how to take their kid fishing without it being an overwhelming sensory experience. And sometimes the progress is that just the parents feel like they understand where their child is coming from, even if some of the functional activities might be going slowly. They have a better sense of how they understand their child and what they can do to facilitate their child's development. But parents, caregivers, they should always feel that, in a relatively short time, they feel like they are more comfortable and understand their child better, and they're starting to see their child actually make some functional gains. Again, sometimes those gains you might think of as something small, like the child just gets through their day at school maybe without as much of a tantrum, or they are able to go to sleep a little bit easier at night, or maybe they are using some words to communicate their choices when it comes to play, or they just tried a new food they haven't tried before.
Yeah, I think that's so important. Those little gains and the little wins Sometimes we're looking at that overall picture. Say if the goal was to try, 5 new textured foods was the long-term goal. But if initially they don't even let you put food on their plates, just a little gain would be just putting the food on the plate and to, just talk about it. So, what does it look like? What does it smell like? Those little tiny gains where before, they might have just pushed the plate off the table and didn't want anything to do with it. So it's really important to capitalize on those little gains and share that with the parents and make sure that they understand that we're moving forward. If at any point, parents feel like they're not moving forward, they're not making progress, I would say talk to the therapist, find out if there's something that they're not seeing, that, they're still making gains, or maybe things need to change. Maybe, we need to work on some different strategies, different ways to tackle a goal. So yeah, there's lots of different reasons, but yeah.
Thank you for bringing up feeding. I know it's one thing that we really haven't touched on, but for sensory restrictive feeding disorders, OT is oftentimes my number one referral because you guys really do a great job breaking it down and helping that food not feel so scary for the patient and for the family that's very worried if kids aren't eating, that's a stress. And if they're not eating healthy, that's a huge stress. And so, but on the flip side of that, if we take away the food that they will eat, then we might end up with a feeding tube, and that's going to be even more of a stress. And so you guys are critical on that pathway for families. And so Dr. Warner and Ms. Boudreau, thank you so much for sharing your insight and the work you do every day for amazing people with autism. So professionals like you really remind us that we don't have to figure it out alone. Parents, you're not alone. You have amazing teammates to put on the field in the right position at the right time. And so with that, I do want to open up for some questions and answers. So if you have any questions, if you'd like to turn on your camera and or your microphone or put it in the chat, we'd be very happy to answer your questions.
Hello. So I have a question. How do you empower the kids to take responsibility for like the skills that they're learning and kind of transition from the parents kind of helping to facilitate the skills learned in therapy to the kids being like, I need to do this. How do they implement it into their like daily life?
That's a great question. I always like to, when I'm first developing goals, the long-term and short-term goals, sharing it with the family and with the child as well, to the ability that they're able to understand it, because I want to make sure, that they're aware of what we're working on and why we're working on it. And yes, initially, sometimes it is, the parent that is guiding that and facilitating that. But I love to, give praise and encouragement, verbal encouragement to the kids I work with, and for them to take ownership of, the little wins that they're making. It could even be like a little, coloring award that we did, like today I did this, successfully did this, to encourage them, to strive towards the independence of the goal. So yeah, that's one way.
Yeah. If you can reach the child and by starting out as where are they at? Kind of what do they want to work on? What do they think they would like to be able to do? And of course, some kids can do that, and the younger kids may have a little harder time doing that. But you always want to start with where is the child at, rather than necessarily setting something up and figuring the child's going to follow your lead. What I find with a lot of kids is that once they start to feel like they're having successes and they can see themselves having successes, and as Jennifer was saying, you're giving them those pats on the back and the cheers and the take home things maybe that they've made and they can show off, then a lot of times you get the ball rolling. But there's a little bit of a formula that I sometimes use too, and that formula kind of starts off with, first you develop that sense of trust and rapport with the child, because if you can get the trust and rapport going, then a lot of times you can get the kids to do things that they wouldn't maybe ordinarily be even interested in trying. And how many kids, even kids who are neurotypical, really want to work on the things that they recognize are the hardest for them? And that's often the challenge of working with kids is, how do you find a way to get them to work on the things that they haven't had success with, or they're just really hard. And one of the ways of working through that is developing that sense of trust and rapport first, and then trying to break the activities down into small enough pieces that they can have successes. And then also helping both child and parents realize that, a lot of this takes just a little bit of time too. Even when you're doing all the right things, it's going to take a little bit of a time for the child to kind of figure it out, get comfortable with it, start to see themselves have success. But once they have success, they almost always just keep going.
Great, thank you.
Excellent question. Excellent answers. Thank you. It's all about the person. Anybody else have any questions?
I was just going to add on to that too. Like Dr. Warner said, building that rapport is so important. And I love it when I find out what the kids are really interested in, whether it's Paw Patrol or dinosaurs, and then just getting really creative with that and incorporating it in all the sessions. If I'm working with a kiddo on feeding, and I know he loves Paw Patrol, like I'm going to have a little Paw Patrol plate and cup and, just customize it and individualize it to what motivates them. Because something that motivates, me or you they don't care at all. So, if it's motivating for them and making it fun, using those creative skills definitely helps and goes a long way.
How many sessions do you feel it takes to get that child's trust? And I know it's different for every child, but do you feel like it takes 2 or 3 before you really can start working on the things that you want to work on with them? Or do you feel like it's more or less?
A lot of times it really just, it depends. As you were saying, each individual child, each individual teenager is kind of coming at this from their own point of view. I would say with the younger kids, it takes sometimes fewer sessions, though, sometimes as many as even just 2 or 3, and you can really see that rapport emerging. Teenagers, sometimes it's a little trickier because the teenagers, you really have to find a way of getting them to buy into coming to therapy sessions. And sometimes they're, for a variety of reasons, maybe a little bit more reluctant. So sometimes with the teenagers, it takes a little bit longer. But the same thing I think holds true, that even with the teenagers, once they feel they've got somebody here who understands them, who's willing to understand them, who's willing to listen to them, a lot of times that becomes the key then to addressing issues that are otherwise hard for them to do.
Excellent. Anybody have any other questions?
So I was just thinking about how often do you have to like work on a team with kids or teenagers? Like, do you have to go in? Do you very often when you have someone you're working with, do you a lot of times work with the school as well? Or does the parent act as the go-between? How does that work?
What have you found?
I would say it's different in different situations. Sometimes it is collaborating with a teacher. Maybe it's just, through email, or maybe the parent is able to invite you to the IEP meeting if that's possible. But yeah, collaboration is definitely key, when we're playing with all those, the key members of the team, and, that includes the teachers, or if they're, in the community, different activities, just finding out, all the different players on the team and connecting with however you can, whatever is available. Yeah.
Yeah, and our biggest challenge is always time. It's and not only from our point as the healthcare provider, but also from the standpoint of parents, teachers, pediatricians, psychologists, trying to connect with everybody trying to find enough time to do that part of the therapeutic process. But yeah, lots of times, as Jennifer was saying, I know we participate in Zoom meetings for schools with teachers, and again, for a variety of reasons, there's been a lot more school conferences in the last couple of years than there have been prior to that, I think. But yeah, we as best you can, you really try to make the connections with anybody who's working with the child, bringing grandparents in, bringing relatives in sometimes to participate in the therapeutic process.
And also letting the parents know that, sharing the resources with them and letting them know, please feel free to give this, to his teacher or his therapist at school. And, if they have questions about it, feel free to contact me. Just so that way we all know, these strategies are working, and we want to, help them as well, so that we're all on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Thank you. Any other questions or even comments from the audience? With that, I want to close today and kind of bring us back where we started. Why do we choose healthcare? So myself and Simone here at Amazing Kids, and Dr. Werner with Child and Family Consultants, and Miss Boudreau with Innovative Beginnings Therapy, We choose this profession because we believe people deserve to be seen. We believe children deserve to be understood. We believe families deserve hope grounded in clarity and action. Autism care is not about fixing a child, it's about understanding a child, recognizing their strengths, supporting their struggles, and building environments where neurodivergent children can thrive, not by changing who they are, but by equipping them and their families with tools that work. And so here at the Autism Playbook Seminar, it is a playbook. It's just that, it's a playbook. It's not a rigid set script, but it's a guide. It's a framework that helps us to respond thoughtfully instead of reactively, a reminder that behavior is communication, a reminder that collaboration changes outcomes, and a reminder that early, informed, and compassionate care alters life trajectories. And our experts here today are providing early, informed, and most importantly, compassionate care to the children and the families that they serve. So every interaction we have, every diagnosis delivered, every referral made, every strategy taught shapes how a family understands their child. And it's a profound responsibility, but it's a responsibility that we have all taken an oath to care for your children. If we stay curious and if we stay collaborative and if we stay anchored to the reason that we entered healthcare in the first place, then we don't just manage autism, we help children access their fullest potential. We help families feel confident as we empower them with teamwork, and we help build a world that understands people with autism, respects people with autism, and I'm so thankful today that you are both willing to join us. Families, we hear you, we see you, and here at Amazing Kids, we are going to continue to empower you with teamwork. So thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much.